I will start. Okay, I got to hit got it to approve it. Okay. So, well, yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus, but who is he? A modern image of Santa Claus, which you see on the screen, is not only an amalgam of everything that went before, but was actually created by the Coca-Cola company in the 1930s. And that's what we tend to imagine. If you go way back, he doesn't look much like that at all. So that's our modern image, and that is an American image. In Britain, it will be Father Christmas rather than Santa Claus, and he tends to have a somewhat longer coat, but the same personage. So, of course, the name Santa Claus comes to us from the Netherlands, where Sinterklaas, or Saint Nicholas, visits on his Saint's Day, December the 6th, and delivers presents to the children. So, of course, to start off, we have to ask, who was Saint Nicholas? Well, Saint Nicholas of Myra, born in the year 270 and died in the year 343, so a long time ago. He was an early Christian bishop of Greek descent from the maritime city of Myra in Asia Minor, which is the modern-day Demre in Turkey. And this was during the time of the Roman Empire. Very little is known about the historical Saint Nicholas. In fact, the earliest accounts of his life were written centuries after his death and certainly contain many legendary elaborations. He was born in the Greek seaport of Patara, Lycia in Asia Minor, to wealthy Christian parents. Tradition says that he gave away all of his inherited wealth and traveled the countryside, helping the poor and the sick. In one of the earliest attested and most famous incidents from his life, he is said to have rescued 3 girls from being forced into prostitution by dropping a sack of gold coins through the window of their house each night for 3 nights, so that their father could pay a dowry for each of them. Another version of this is they each received a gold ball. Over the course of many years, Nicholas's popularity spread, and he became the well-known protector of children and sailors. St. Nicholas is the patron of many different groups. For example, he is the patron saint of sailors, merchants, archers, repentant thieves, children, brewers, pawnbrokers, prostitutes, unmarried people, and students in various cities and countries of Europe. If we consider this, we might note that the sign and the modern sign of a pawnbroker is in fact 3 gold balls hung outside the store, though I'm not sure I've seen that too much in America, but in Britain you will still see that as a sign of a pawnbroker or loaner in return for various possessions. His feast day is celebrated on the anniversary of his death, which is December the 6th. By the Renaissance, St. Nicholas was the most popular saint in Europe. Even after the Protestant Reformation, when the veneration of saints began to be discouraged, St. Nicholas maintained a positive reputation, especially in the Netherlands. In 1087, while the Greek inhabitants of Myra were subjugated under the newly arrived Muslim dynasty, a group of merchants from the Italian city of Bari removed the major bones of Nicholas's skeleton from his sarcophagus in the Greek church in Myra. Over the objection of the monks of Myra, the sailors took the bones of St. Nicholas to Bari, where they are now enshrined in the Basilica di San Nicola. St. Nicholas is therefore also known as St. Nicholas of Bari. Sailors from Bari collected just half of Nicholas's skeleton, leaving all the minor fragments in the church sarcophagus. They were later taken by Venetian sailors during the First Crusade and placed in Venice, where a church to St. Nicholas, the patron saint of sailors, was built on the island of San Nicolo al Lido. During the Middle Ages, often on the evening of his name day, 6th of December, children were bestowed gifts in honor of St. Nicholas. The custom of giving gifts to children at Christmas instead of St. Nicholas's Day was propagated by Martin Luther to focus the interest on of the children on Christ instead of the veneration of the saints. But Nicholas remained popular as the gift bearer to people. St. Nicholas's Day is celebrated in the Netherlands on December the 6th, and there is St. Nicholas on a horse, no reindeer, and there are many different pictures of St. Nicholas because he turns up in many different towns in the Netherlands, and he's not always wearing a red coat. He can be wearing a blue coat or other coat, but he is presented as a bishop. Well, this image of St. Nicholas was brought to the United States by Dutch immigrants and became popular in American culture towards the end of the 18th century. In December, for example, in December 1773, and again in 1774, a New York newspaper reported that groups of Dutch families have gathered to honor the anniversary of his death. But that doesn't give us our modern Santa Claus. We're missing a lot of the features of our modern Santa Claus, so we now have to seek elsewhere and bring in some other characters to make our modern Santa Claus. Okay, we find that modern Santa Claus or Father Christmas owes much to the Norse god Odin. Many of our Christmas traditions, decorating trees, wreaths, mistletoe, etc., can be traced back to Yule, or a popular Scandinavian holiday with connections to the Norse god Odin. Evidence of this would be that there are many popular Christmas carols that mention Yule, Yuletide, Yule logs, etc. While the church replaced popular pagan holidays with Christian holidays, many of the original Yule traditions continued through the years. During Yule, all the gods and Scandinavian gods were honored, especially Odin, who is referred to as Yule-Far, or the Yule Father. Yule is known as a time in which family and friends would strengthen their ties with each other through hospitality, feasting, drinking, gift-giving, and merrymaking in the face of the privations and dangers of winter. Here, and now we have, this is the Norse god Odin. When we look past our modern advertisement-adjusted image of Santa Claus to more traditional images, such as vintage postcards, I'm not sure, I'm going to, which I will come to shortly. Vintage postcards, we find that the original Santa is wearing blue or brown, and looks more like a Norse god and not the Bishop of Myra. And so we suddenly find our comparisons taking shape. Odin was known for taking many forms and many names, but one of his favorite forms was that of an old, white-bearded traveler clad in a cloak and a broad-brimmed hat or hood. As seen in the pictures I'm starting to show you now. We'll go to the next one, and I'm going to come back. Here's Odin pictured on the right in a traditional picture as the god Odin. And towards on the left, we see one of the early images of Santa Claus, and you can see the similarity. And I'm going to stop we're getting feedback from somebody's, thank you. Okay, I'm going to stop for a minute and show you here I have, and I'm going to have to go far enough back. This is Santa in our house, which was given to us by my mother-in-law many years ago. And for years, I didn't understand it. He's not wearing a red coat. He has a hooded cap. He has a beard. So what do we have here? We have indeed Santa derived from Odin. And I'm going to go back to share screen. And indeed, if you look at these, I got to remember, if you look at these images from postcards of the early 1800s, you will see Santa looking rather like I just showed you. A long cloak, hooded or broad-brimmed cap, long beard, but far, far from our modern Santa. Who does
Peter, are those postcards from the America or from England or
they
where?
are from America. They are American, to my knowledge. Because this is how Santa was depicted in the early 1800s. Santa didn't have any Coke yet. So I'm going to go back. I could have had a better order here. And okay, Odin was reputed to use this disguise because he doesn't look like the original god I showed you sitting on a chair, while he traveled the world seeking knowledge. He traveled the world on an 8-legged horse. And so here you see an image of Odin on his 8-legged horse crossing the skies. And he went with, not alone, but he went with a pack of gods, elves, beasts, and ancestral spirits, rewarding the good and punishing the bad. So here again, we have this image of Santa knows if you've been bad or good. That comes directly from the Norse god Odin. The imagery of Odin was in fact one that any Viking would have been familiar with. And as for the original descriptions of Santa, well, the sentiments of "'twas the night before Christmas" and before his reinvention as Santa of Coca-Cola fame, Santa was originally depicted as a tall, gaunt man with with a fur-trimmed cloak and broad-brimmed hat and hood. Odin crosses the skies during the nights of Yule, rewarding the good and punishing the bad. The Vikings and other modern Europeans believed that Odin raced across the windy night skies with his pack of gods, elves, beasts, ancestral spirits in the great hunt against the ice giants and the forces of darkness. While the wild hunt was on, those who provoked the ire of the gods would find themselves caught with bad luck, while those whom Odin favored would receive good fortune and gifts. The wild hunt was especially associated with the 12 nights of Yule. So there we have the 12 days of Christmas. Santa crossing the night skies and the whole world on Christmas shares very similar imagery. So here's one picture of Odin. Here is a rather somewhat wilder painting from 1872. Odin there is at the leading the pack, but there you see his whole host of, well, more than elves, let's say. But you get the idea, I think. Odin is known for having a flying 8-legged horse. The original Santa in the pictures, in fact, that I just showed you, Santa is riding a horse, not reindeer or a sleigh. The concept of Santa using reindeer, 8 of them, interestingly enough, Odin had an 8-legged horse, was introduced later in 1823 through the poem A Visit from St. Nicholas, also known as the 'Twas But the Night Before Christmas. Many of the other Norse gods were known as having sleighs, and they were drawn by magical flying beasts. Norse myth not only has many instances of Odin giving gifts to mankind, in addition to creating the world, giving people life and other things one might expect of a god, Odin would sometimes show up and provide a worthy person with some special item that they needed. Odin, as I said, was referred to as the Yule Father, and Santa was originally called Father Christmas. That's before he got called Santa. Even in the US, he was Father Christmas, and he still is known as Father Christmas in the UK. The dwarves and elves of Norse mythology were commonly known as the creators of wondrous things, and gift-making elves were referred to as Odin's men. The Norse believed that Odin knew if you were bad or good. Odin was said to live in a supernatural world because Asgard, a realm removed from our reality and only accessible by crossing the Bifrost Bridge. A good portion of Scandinavia is inside the Arctic Circle, and early people of Scandinavia naturally equated these inhospitable regions of the midnight sun and the northern lights as a place of magic and the lands of gods and giants. And now we know that Santa lives at the North Pole. Folklorist Margaret Baker stated the following: the appearance of Santa Claus or Father Christmas, whose day is the 25th of December, owes much to Odin, the old blue-hooded, cloaked, white-bearded gift-bringer of the North, who rode the midwinter sky on his 8-footed steed, Sleipnir, visiting people with gifts. Odin, over time, transformed into Father Christmas, and then Santa Claus, prospered with Saint Nicholas and the Christ child, and became a leading player on the Christmas stage. But let's go back and look at some adoptions of Father Christmas starting in the 1600s.
You want to come in, Edward?
Okay. The image of Father Christmas evolved slowly. The illustration on the screen is showing the conflict of a character in 1652. Father Christmas is depicted as the central character. However, the Puritans, and of course these were the people who originally came over to New England, wanted nothing to do with Father Christmas. They did not believe in festivities and jollity. And so the figure in there, you can see on the right, it says, keep out, you come not here. And Father Christmas says, sir, I bring good cheer. And then we have on the other side, oh, Christmas, welcome, do not fear. So there's this conflict. The specific depiction of Christmas as a merry old man begins in the early 17th century in the contents of resistance to Puritan criticism of the observation of the Christmas feast. He is old because of the antiquity of the feast itself, which its defenders saw as a good old Christian custom to be kept. Puritan Christian sects, Lutherans, Calvinists, and others were opposed to the festive celebration of Christmas because it contains so many pagan influences and associations, as we have seen. It was actually banned in Boston in the late 1600s. Allegory was popular at the time, and so Old Christmas was given a voice to protest his exclusion, as you see above, along with the form of a rambunctious, jolly old man. Here is another one where you see Father Christmas seated and the Puritans at the door trying to get rid of him. And underneath it says, behold the majesty and grace of loving, cheerful Christmas face, who made thousands with one breath, cry out, let him be put to death. Who many thousands with one breath, cry out, let him be put to death, who indeed can never die so long as man hath memory. So there we see Father Christmas finally triumphing over the effort by the Puritans to get rid of him. By the 1800s, Santa or Father Christmas seems to be the bringing of cheer and wealth and warmth, often carrying a Yule log with sprigs of holly round his head and a wassail bowl full of alcoholic cider. So here's a couple of images from the early 1800s. On the left, there he is looking more like, again, Odin. No reindeer in sight. In fact, he's riding a goat. But now they're both bringing good cheer. On the right, you will see he's carrying a Yule log for warmth over the Christmas season. He's got holly round his head, and both these characters from the early 1800s are carrying bowls of Christmas cheer or wassail, which is a warm alcoholic cider drink. Okay. If you look at these, we still, from the early 1800s, we still do not see the jolly, portly, red-coated personification of the season that he will become a century later. So let's look at how we got from there to our current Santa Claus. The turning point giving us a jolly old elf with a sleigh and flying reindeer was Clement Clarke Moore. In 1822, Moore, an Episcopal minister, wrote a long poem for his three daughters entitled An Account of the Visit from St. Nicholas, more popularly known as 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. Moore's poem, which he was initially hesitant to publish due to the frivolous nature of its subject, is largely responsible for our modern image of Santa Claus as a right jolly old elf, with a portly figure and a supernatural ability to ascend a chimney with a mere nod of his head. One of the things that always puzzled me as a child was how Santa Claus went up a chimney. All you have to do is visit an really old house or old pub in England, and you will find the chimney, the hearth is 8 foot wide, and the chimney is probably 6 foot by 4 foot. So these old chimneys are plenty big enough for even a portly man to climb up and down. So because we have to get the image to, I guess, the children as to how could this jolly man get into the house, the chimney is the answer. Although some of Moore's imagery is probably borrowed from other sources, his poem helped popularize the now familiar image of Santa Claus, who flew from house to house on Christmas Eve in a miniature sleigh led by 8 flying reindeer to leave presents to deserving children. An account of the visit from St. Nicholas created a new and immediately popular American icon. So we've now made the transition from the previous gaunt Santa Clauses, the beard, the holly remains, but now for some reason he's become rather portly. Well, and Clement Moore lived in Manhattan, and so we now are up to the early 1800s, and in 1844, a Cincinnati newspaper announced that the sterling old Dutchman Santa Claus has just arrived from the renowned regions of the Manhattoes, which is Manhattan, with his usual budget of knickknacks for the Christmas times. Manhattan, in fact, is where Santa Claus, the secular reimagining of St. Nicholas, first emerged, care of the many nostalgias amongst the city's lettered and business classes. But he later relocated to the North Pole, or in European tradition, to Lapland in northern Scandinavia. Santa's migration north allows us a fascinating insight into the 19th century preoccupation with high latitudes, while winter details furnish the man with many of his trappings. In 1881, the political cartoonist Thomas Nash, shown on the screen, drew on Moore's poem to create the first likeness that matches our modern image of Santa Claus. His cartoon, which appeared in Harper's Weekly, depicted Santa as a rotund, cheerful man with a full white beard, holding a sack laden with toys for lucky children. It was Nast who gave us Santa Claus his bright red suit trimmed with red fur, North Pole workshop, elves, and his wife, Mrs. Claus. It's no surprise that wintry elements should have been attached to Nicholas's iconography, given his December the 6th feast day and his popularity in Northern Europe, far from his Byzantine origins in what is now southern Turkey. Nicholas was closely associated with chimney and hearth long before Europeans first settled Manhattan Island in the early 17th century. But it was only with his rise in visibility in New York that he appeared against a background of new fallen snow, complete with sleigh and 8 named reindeer. The poem's landscape mirrored the winter view of Moore's study window in Manhattan, and the sleigh was borrowed from the surrounding roads. One account of 1820 Broadway depicted painted sleighs with scarlet cloth and buffalo skins that were dashing along in all directions at a prodigious speed. Not that American sleighs were ever drawn by reindeer. Although reindeer were familiar here, their habitat extended as far south as New Hampshire and Ohio in the late 19th century. They were never used as draft animals beyond the European and Russian Arctic. Winter haulage in Manhattan fell to horses, and in the far northern wilderness to huskies. So what was it about reindeer that appealed to the anonymous New York writer of A Children's Friend in 1821, when he wrote, "Old Santa Claus, with much delight, his reindeer drives this frosty night," the first published reference to the partnership? Most probably it was the long European tradition of reindeer domestication, which allowed Santa with an instant patina of age, as well as the animal's mystical qualities, largely derived from the Sami peoples of northern Scandinavia, who believed their own dead returned as reindeer. So let's go back. So where we are right now is there is the amalgamas as far as we've got. If we start in the center, we've got St. Nicholas the Bishop, again in the Netherlands below. We've got the Norse god, top left, who becomes somewhat more civilized, if you like, in the top right, bottom left. Father Christmas, again derived from the Norse god, center top. Now turning up as the portly, jolly old elf from Nass depiction in the late 1800s, but we still really don't have quite that image that is on the right. So let's press on. So where did the flying reindeer come from? Of all the epithets coined for the Arctic regions, none is more common than the North Pole. Explorers heading for the Arctic were considered to have left for the North Pole, though the truth is that nobody at the time came anywhere near the literal top of the world. So long as 90 degrees north remained beyond physical reach, the North Pole functioned instead as an evocative abstraction of the Arctic regions in general, free to serve the furthest flights of fancy. It served as home to Hans Christian Andersen's Snow Queen, 1845, whose ice palace was situated high up towards the North Pole. 2 decades later, in 1866, a Christmas illustration in Harper's Weekly, captioned "Santa Clausville, North Pole," confirmed that Santa had followed the Snow Queen north. Subsequent Christian issues included a girl mailing a letter to St. Claus, North Pole, in 1879, and 2 children tracing Santa's route on a map from the North Pole to the United States in 1885. The Americans have persisted with the North Pole, but by name rather than latitude. And though Santa's home may no longer be in Manhattan, his spirit remains there in a city so influential to his creation. Santa Claus' red and white color scheme is linked to a genius Coca-Cola advertising campaign, as I've already mentioned. Yet elements of Santa Claus' tale and life, especially Moore's poem, reveal a different story. When one thinks of Christmas at this time of year, one immediately imagines colors red and white, especially Santa Claus' famous red and white attire. And yet Santa Claus only starts being depicted in these colors in the mid-19th century in the US. The connection here would lie in Siberian and Arctic regions, where shamans dropped into local people's homes with bags full of white-spotted magic mushrooms as presents in late December. Santa is a modern counterpart of a shaman who consumed mind-altering plants and fungi to commune with, I got one further on, there we are, that's better. To see top right, to commune with the spirit world. These practicing shamans or priests connected to older traditions, and they would collect Amanita muscaria or holy mushrooms, dry them, and give them as gifts on the winter solstice, according to John Rush, an anthropologist and instructor at Siena College. Here's these mushrooms. And what is interesting, some Christmas cards from the 1800s depict these red, white-spotted mushrooms. And there you can see a couple of cards in the insert. And you could also buy them as tree ornaments. And there are the little spotted mushrooms in a box of tree ornaments at the bottom. So this mushroom, Amanita muscaria, is found throughout the Northern Hemisphere under conifers and birch trees, just like presents found under the Christmas tree by excited and happy children. This could explain the tradition of red and white wrapped gifts placed under the Christmas tree, just like the magic mushrooms. Amanita muscaria are classified as poisonous, which might be the reason that shamans initially hang them out to dry, just like what colorful ornaments on a Christmas tree. Santa's flying reindeer have a familiar connection with Amanita muscaria. Reindeer in general are common across Europe and Siberia, and just like the human inhabitants of these areas, they too consume these mushrooms. And obviously when people consume, they do in small amounts, where you start getting hallucinations and not at the poisonous level. Harvard University biologist Donald Pfister suggests that Siberians who ingested these mushrooms may have hallucinated that the grazing reindeer were actually flying. Research has shown that reindeer, in fact, have a fondness for Amanita muscaria. The deputy editor of the Pharmaceutical Journal, Andrew Hayes, wrote in 2010 that animals deliberately seek out the red and white spotted mushrooms in their habitats as they have a desire to experience altered states of consciousness. I don't know if reindeer have altered states of consciousness, but you get the idea. Haynes also wrote, for humans, a common side effect is mushrooms is the feeling of flying. So it is interesting that the legend about Santa's reindeer is that they can fly. At first glance, one thinks that this is ridiculous, but it is not, said Carl Ruck, a professor of classics at Boston University. Who ever heard of reindeer flying? I think it's becoming general knowledge that Santa is taking a trip with his reindeer. According to the two researchers, the shamans who actually deal with reindeer spirits and the ingestion of mushrooms is well documented. Siberian shamans did wear red and white pelts, and the coloring of Santa's garb is mainly meant to mirror the coloring of the Amanita mushrooms, Rush added. As for sleighs, the point is not the mode of travel, but that the trip is involving transportation to a different celestial realm. Sometimes people would also drink the urine of the shaman or the reindeer, as the hallucinogenic compounds are excreted this way without some of the harmful chemicals being present in the mushrooms, which are broken down by the shaman or the reindeer, according to Rush. People who know about shamanism accept this story, Rush said. Is there any reason, any other reason that Santa lives at the North Pole? It is a tradition that can be traced back to Siberia. And if we go, I'm going back a couple of pictures, and once again, look at the dress of the people in northern Finland, Siberia, the Sami. There's a Sami woman in traditional dress there, center. She has a reindeer horn. And we once again see the red and the white, and the similarity to Father Christmas is not the short jacket, but the similarity there to a Father Christmas depicted as the red and white of the Sami, and again the similarity to the mushrooms. So back to our original question. Who is Santa Claus? Who is Father Christmas? We have to concede that our current giver of gifts to little children is an amalgam of Saint Nicholas, the Norse god Odin, as modified over the years, the imagination of Clement Clark Moore and Coca-Cola, and possibly a little magic from northern reindeer herders. Nonetheless, he holds the imagination of little children with his magic of traveling the whole world in one night in a sleigh driven by flying reindeer. Not only that, but the WHO declared him to be COVID immune, which is good for the little children. And that's the end of my story. So if you have any comments, they are welcome. I should say I